I'm Karen Parsons. I am principal planner at the Regional Planning Commission, and I was project manager for the Louisiana International Terminal St. Bernard evaluation.
I'm Jeff Razel. I am the executive director of the Regional Planning Commission. The purpose of the study is to assess traffic impacts that would result from the implementation of the Louisiana International Terminal that the port is working on. The Port of New Orleans is working on in Violet, and so that study is looking at existing conditions, existing traffic conditions, forecasted traffic coming from the port from various methods, and ultimately forecasted impacts.
So our team went out and set up cameras that count the number of cars and trucks and vehicles moving through 17 intersections, look at traffic turning data, counted bicycles and pedestrians, and then you take all that data and do the analysis on what the current land use looks like and future land use, which may generate traffic, and then that tells us the number of cars and trucks that would be forecast for the roadways and how it would impact the major intersections. So in our evaluation, we looked at existing conditions, and we started the study in 2023, so that was 1 year. We also looked out at 2030 and 2050. So those were the years that sort of the horizon year for future traffic. And after looking at those 17 intersections, really 5 came up as being impacted in some way. And those were Judge Perez at Parish and Judge Perez at Palmisano Boulevard, and then St. Bernard Highway at Parish, Palmisano, and Colonial. And then from that, we were able to say, with and without the port, what would the impacts be on those intersections? We looked at those 5 intersections and also the 2 railroad crossings, one in Arabi. At St. Bernard Crossing and at Judge Perez. And those, we found that even today, they're pretty much unacceptable. And the recommendation was that something could be done with those immediately. So what we found also was that really today there's unacceptable delay at Palmisano and St. Bernard Highway already. That carried through, of course, into 2030 and 2050. Even if you never build the Louisiana International Terminal.
If you had the terminal and there were no other improvements, basically five intersections, fairly major intersections, would fail. If you had no terminal, one would fail. One is failing now. One would fail. And then the rail crossings in Arabi would also fail. They're failing now and they would fail in the future. So when things are starting to fail, we have to look at what becomes more or less justified in evaluation. It basically gave us the opportunity to justify looking at a new road that would be more direct towards LIT.
Once all that data was collected, we had a public meeting. We asked the people who attended what they thought about how traffic would move through their parish. And we got a lot of suggestions at that public meeting about routes through the wetlands. So that was some of the public input that came into this evaluation. And then based on the information that we had, we looked at different segments. We looked at routes through the wetlands.
RPC initially identified 32 possible routes. They applied a 3-step screening process to narrow them down. First, they looked at whether the route met the project's purpose and need, including factors like protected species and cultural resources. Only 12 routes moved on to the second round. In the second round, routes were scored on impacts to the community's wetlands and infrastructure needs like bridges. That left just 7 feasible options.
Those 7 went to the second public meeting, and that's what the public that attended and online, I think, were able to give us their feedback on.
Right, to weigh in on specifically as to their preference. And so that that led to ultimately three alternatives. It was alternative 22, 25, and
12.
12. The overwhelming choice of the public at the meeting was alternative 22.
Alternative 22 takes the road directly from the back of the port, runs parallel to the 40 Arpent Canal until it reaches Parish Road. This route allows for a rail option. Alternative 12 takes a similar route from the back of the port through the wetlands until it reaches Parish Road near the Green Bridge, just north of Eddie Pinto's Marina. This route does not include a rail option. The final route, Alternative 25, starts along the front of the port and enters Judge Perez, where it travels for approximately 3.6 miles and then cuts through the Sinclair track and eventually takes a similar route as Alternative 22 through the wetlands. This route allows for a rail option.
I think the concern was, is it, why that alternative that uses the Sinclair route at grade? And some of it is, this was just another way to solve the problem, perhaps, and it was available green space, and it was, as it turns out, about $250 million less expensive than the other two routes that were only in the wetlands.
It's not the best, as far as traffic is concerned. The straighter shot, the more direct shot would be the most expeditious, would be the direct connection. If you had to settle, then that would be the option without precluding the rail, and so that's why that's there.
The study also outlined the improvements that would be necessary for Judge Perez and Parish Road if no elevated highway were constructed. These included intersection improvements, structural enhancements, lane widening, and noise mitigation measures to support increased traffic and community impact.
So without the elevated highway being built, there was $260 million worth of improvements to LA 39 and LA 47, so to Judge Perez and to Parish Road. And those really were...
to accommodate the truck traffic.
Yeah, so to reconstruct those roadways, to make them really made more viable, if you will, for truck traffic. These are state routes. They're owned and maintained by the state of Louisiana, and they're built for economic development and getting goods to market, and as well as for local and regional travel. So could the port terminal be built today without the elevated highway? I think the answer is yes.
It can be. Now, would it operate effectively? That's
Yes.
the other question. The other question is, would it operate effectively, and would we not recreate a problem that we find in other places where you don't do this? And the port facility now in New Orleans has experienced over the last several years significant traffic deficiencies, particularly at US 90 at Tchoupitoulas, where the truck traffic enters the interstate system. There's a lot of delay, and there's a lot of issues with that, and so we don't recreate a similar problem.
Yeah.
Is where we're headed, where we'd like to avoid that by creating a more expeditious route and bypass local traffic and bypass local impacts as well.